Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. This is Harold Graham, and this is the Social Impact Revolution podcast. I am the CEO of Social Impact Investment. We're a platform that marries blockchain technology with ESG reporting. Today, we have the most amazing guest, Carrie Rich, who is the CEO of the Global Impact Fund and also a not-for-profit called the Global Good Fund, right? So today, without further ado, we'll get things started right away. This is going to be a great conversation. We're going to talk about ESG. We're going to talk about donors. We're going to talk about experience with investors. And we're also going to talk a little bit about what we believe the market is doing, where it's going, and where it will end up in the long run. Carrie, I'd like to turn things over to you and just talk a little bit about where you started, where you're headed, the Global Impact Fund, and the global, all your companies. I mean, and don't leave anything out. We really want to hear about your background.
Thank you. Well, Harold, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, as you can tell. So my background, I went to school for health administration, and my one of my first jobs was working in a healthcare facility. And at the time, I was an intern, and I had the worst jobs in the hospital. So, I mopped the floor and pushed the snack cart. And the best job I got was taking attendance at a meeting. And who should walk in the room but the CEO of the health system? And I was so excited to get to meet the CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company, and thought, why would the CEO talk to me, the intern, especially when he has, thousands of employees? And I thought, he had been building a community organization in Haiti for the 25 years, 30 years that he'd been CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company. And I thought, that's someone who knows how to live a life of purpose, how to build legacy. So I'm sure everyone wants to talk to him about healthcare. He's a healthcare CEO, but I'm going to ask to have a conversation about living a life of purpose and what it looks like to build legacy. So I reached out through LinkedIn to his executive assistant, and she graciously granted me a meeting. And it was so exciting and interesting, and just really fulfilled my sense of purpose and curiosity to learn. And I didn't want it to end. So I blurted out at the end of the meeting, would you write a book with me? Because that's all I could think to say that would, continue the conversation. Now, granted, I had no idea how to write a book or what we would write a book about, but to my shock, he said yes. And so that started conversations about really translating his vision for the future of health into a book. And one day he called up and said, I had this idea. I'd like to create a job for you called Director of Vision Translation. And I said, I've never heard of such a job, but it sounds amazing. Sign me up. And I started working for him, and, he really invested in my leadership. And when you get the CEO invest in your leadership, your career obviously moves more quickly than it would have had that not been the case. And I thought, gosh, I'm really privileged and lucky and fortunate to have someone invest in me this way. There are all these other young people who work really hard, who have a strong moral compass, but they don't get to have the CEO invest in them. And so I went to him one day and said this, and I said, let's do something about it. So he and I co-founded about 10 years ago a nonprofit organization called the Global Good Fund.
10 years.
Yeah.
That's something. I'm telling you, that's something. That's important. And, I got to say, going back to the initial comment that you made about not knowing about how to write a book or anything like that, it goes back to that great Branson quote where he says, if someone asks you to do something, tell them you can do it, and then figure out how to do it afterwards.
I'm a big fan of that idea.
Yes.
We say yes, and we go figure it out.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's what we did for the last 10 years. Was we built this global nonprofit organization, which I can't say was my intention when we got started. I just really wanted to find ways to give a platform to people who might be overlooked by traditional markets. And so, I reached out on social media to my peer network, and my former boss reached out to his peer network, which were the CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies. And we put those two groups together as catalysts for social good. And what we were looking for were people who had taking an airplane, taking a dive out the window, and we're figuring out how to build a parachute on the way down. So they already had established a business. They were open to feedback. They were humble enough to take feedback, and they wanted to grow and do good for the world. And so, Global Good Fund was chugging along. Half of our entrepreneurs are women domestically, and 2/3 are Black and brown founders, which is really different from what you see in traditional markets. And all of them, 100%, are running companies that benefit the world. They're improving the health of communities, access to education, the environment.
Well, that's where you left most of the market. I mean, even in the mid 2010s, most of the market was still focused very clearly on profit only. And, it wouldn't have made any difference, the ethnicity or the sex of the person running the company.
Yeah, well, it turns out that people who are closest to the problems come up with the best solutions. And so,
Agreed.
so what we found was that when we focused on supporting in the nonprofit, the best companies, all kinds of people have great ideas, but access to opportunity to grow those ideas was not equal. And so venture capitalists, VCs, started recognizing that we had access to deals.
Well,
and so
a very few venture capitalists.
Yeah, but they started coming.
Agreed.
And they said, would you give us access to your entrepreneurs? And I said, well, this is great. These venture capitalists want to come in and give access to capital for our entrepreneurs at the nonprofit, the Global Good Fund. The entrepreneurs need access to capital to continue scaling their business. And then I realized Global Good Fund had done all this work, due diligencing the companies, sifting through 3,000 plus applicants a year, sorting through them for 7 months.
Wow, that's actually not that many. I mean, sincerely, that's only like 10 a week.
Yeah, they're de-risking the companies over the course of a year through philanthropic capital. And then these VCs would come in and cherry pick the best companies. And so what we did 5 years ago was we said, let's come up with a pilot impact fund. Let's create a for-profit company that can take equity in businesses to create market-leading returns that also exist to drive social impact. Their core focus is to create a better world in one of these leading industries: health, education, the environment, financial, technology, or social mobility. And it worked. So we raised an initial $500,000 company, a venture capital fund. And at the time, I thought, who's going to pay attention to a $500,000 company? And what our VC board member at the time said was, do a great job running a small business and people will pay attention.
Agreed.
And so 10 investors said, I believe in you, wrote $50,000 checks and said, have at it. And I went and personally picked the companies with some really phenomenal support from people who helped me learn how to run a fund and evaluate deals. And we have 80% of our portfolio companies are led by Black, brown, and women founders. They're performing as well as any VC market leading returns would deliver. That's wonderful. And so we're really thrilled with the first company.
To that point, now we're into, this is what we're here to talk about, which is, where did this all start? Where did you see it start? Where did it start for you? And I think you kind of identified that in regards to your story, in that you always had a mission in mind.
Yeah.
You weren't sure where it was all going to take you, but in the beginning, it was recognizing someone else's mission and wanting to get word out about that. And then ultimately, I'm not sure who it was that showed you that you could also help other people to bring their missions forward, but that's what you set out to do, it seems, and you're now actively doing that. Where do you see the market now in regards to this? Are you having an easier time fundraising now based on all the parameters you just mentioned, the majority being Black and brown or women founders, everything being set as a fund that is attempting to change the way we live and change things for the better, both environmentally and socially? And so I'm wondering, are you having an easier time fundraising? Are you having a harder time fundraising? What are you seeing from the market right now?
Yeah, so you and I both know how hard fundraising is. So I think it's really hard. I set out with an Excel spreadsheet and some names, and I got rejected all the time. And I also had people say, yes, I'm in. I want to be writing history. I want to be shaping the way that future markets and current markets are run. And I think part of what helped was that if you took sustainability only as market share, sustainably and sustainability marketed products were almost 55% of consumer packaged goods market growth up to 2019, the year 2019. But they only represented 16% of the share of their category. And so what we're seeing was that they were growing 7 times faster than products that were not sustainably marketed.
Now, are we talking about sustainability in regards to just environment, or are we talking about financial sustainability?
Just environment.
Okay.
And just consumer packaged goods. But what we were seeing was that big companies, family offices, foundations started paying attention. That with regard to marketing and consumer packaged goods and purchasing decisions with regard to specifically sustainability, the market was paying attention. And so it created this opening, whereas 10 years ago, people didn't know what a social enterprise was.
Oh, God, no.
There weren't enough for-profit companies with a mission to invest in. Today, there are plenty. And they're traditionally, they're overlooked by traditional markets. And that's where we saw a real opportunity to capitalize on deals that we saw early, that we have access to early, and that both sides of the market trusted us. The entrepreneurs,
your not-for-profit actually serves your for-profit, right? I mean, so some of the entrepreneurs, I'm not saying all, but some of the entrepreneurs that you are working with in your not-for-profit end up in the VC, do they not?
Yes, that's true. And we're not exclusively linked, so we can choose to invest in entrepreneurs that come out of the Global Good Fund, as well as entrepreneurs who have nothing to do with the nonprofit organization. And in exchange, Global Impact Fund gives back a portion of the general partnerships carry, our incentive, goes back to the nonprofit, the Global Good Fund, to continue to philanthropically support Black, brown, women founders who otherwise have a really tough time raising capital.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a tough time for anyone to raise capital, especially right now after the pandemic, when everyone basically parked their money where they were going to park it. And most that I know haven't moved it yet. It's just a tough time right now.
There's a lot of venture capital funds that's available in the market, but not to founders who look like me, not to Black and brown founders, not necessarily to socially impactful businesses.
Right.
And so if you want to move the needle, you got to look differently.
This leads me to my next question, which is, what is your thought on, I mean, we could go crazy getting really granular on what we believe ESG parameters should be. But I'm wondering, from where you sit, how do you see yourself, your venture fund, fitting into, let's just say you had an institution. You talked we were talking before we got started here, and you were saying that there were more funds to come. Right now, you're not capped at your current fund, but you're going to start another one, and that one will have a much larger cap than this one does. Yep. And so when you get into that, I'm sure you're going to eventually start to take on institutional money. And I'm wondering, how do you see that fitting in, and what parameters do you see that should be implemented by those larger institutional funds as to their, putting you or an organization like yours into their ES&G fund?
Yeah. So thanks for the great question. We're on our second fund, and we already have some institutional investors. We have
excellent. I didn't know that.
We have some foundations. So the reality is that there are some early movers, but it's relatively few. A lot of people and institutions, are interested in impacting investing or ESG, but they're not willing to take the risk that's required because the people running funds that do ESG and impact investing are going to look different than traditional venture capitalists. Traditional venture capitalists have had decades to do impact-focused investing and chose not to.
Right.
So now, if you want to invest in venture capital opportunities that will be impactful, you have to be willing to invest in fund managers that do not look like traditional fund managers.
And do not invest like traditional fund managers.
Exactly. And so what I am looking forward to is including more institutional investors as we grow. Where we are today that I'm really proud of is we made a commitment for our Global Impact Fund. We said, in addition to having a portfolio of companies that is diverse in every way, we want our general partnership to be diverse. So we're a woman and Black-led fund. We want our investment committee who's evaluating our deals to be diverse. We have Indigenous, Indian, Latinx, Black, white, male. We got all kinds. If you,
right.
Whoever you are, and you come to pitch to our investment committee, you'll see someone who looks like you.
Covers the governance portion perfectly.
There you go. But the thing I'm most proud of is that whether you measure our investor base by amount of capital or number of LPs, of investors, more than 50%, are Black, brown, or women investors.
That's great.
And what that means is we're creating wealth not only for our portfolio companies, but for people who previously were excluded from investing.
You're bringing true diversity to the investment marketplace.
Yes.
And that just, it's rare, very rare.
It makes us stronger. When we have a company that comes in, we want to leverage expertise from our investor base.
Right.
A really incredible base of people to leverage their expertise.
Okay, so that answers that question. On to, let's talk about the venture fund and where it's headed now and where you'd like to see, if you wouldn't mind, try to put yourself in or your business in context to where you see the market going. Let's go 10 years out.
Yes. So right now where we are is we're concluding our capital raise. So we're almost there. And we're really excited.
This is fund number 2, right?
Fund number 2, we've already started deploying capital we have 5 portfolio companies. We're about to sign on. We're finishing up 2 more. 3 of those are Black women-led businesses, 4 are Black-led businesses.
That's really exciting.
Additional women-led businesses, and we're looking to include even more diversity. And 100% are socially impactful. And the point of all of these investments, the number one goal is to make money for our investors. That's the point of this. So I want to be crystal clear about that because some people believe that, ESG investing, you don't earn as much financial returns. And that's really not the point. So
that's hilarious.
The message here is that if you don't earn market leading financial returns, there will be no future for this type.
Yeah, right.
So
exactly.
That's the first point where our goal is to make strong market leading returns for our investors. What we're working on now, we'd really like to partner with companies that want to get us on their platforms as an investment option for families as well as institutional investors. So
we're not talking about RIAs. We're talking more like your T. Rowe Prices, that kind of thing.
Institutions, yes, and also smaller boutique companies that work with private families.
Sure.
Where they say they want access to impactful opportunities to invest, and we will make that easy for them to have great impact and produce strong financial returns.
Excellent.
The future of what ESG looks like, I hope there's no category called ESG because my peers demand they're not going to work for companies that don't care about social impact. They will not stay at companies if they don't care about social impact. And they will not invest in companies unless they are committed to social impact. So purpose is going to drive my generation's business decisions.
The idea is that eventually there is no such thing as ESG because everything is. There would be no need to point out specific investment parameters because everyone already invests on those parameters. The evolution of capitalism as we're seeing it looks to me like, and I'd like you to comment on this, please, but it looks to me like we're headed toward having a more direct access to information in regards to all our consumer purchases and who those companies, who those products, who those materials have affected in bringing them to light. So as granular as you go to buy a yogurt, for breakfast, and you look at the side of the container and it says how many people work at the dairy. It says whether the cows were local or sourced from another country, and it also talks about the container that it's delivered in and the carbon footprint of that container, etc.
So that
is that where you see things going too?
Absolutely. That transparency is key. And it's part of our due diligence process. I mean, we need to know everything about your supply chain. We want to know who owns the factories, who is employed there, how much are they paid, where do the materials come from? That's part of our due diligence process. And it's critical if you're going to be, if your investors are going to be trusting you to make impactful decisions. We need to know what that looks like.
Certainly. And the more transparency we can deliver to the marketplace, the more likely it is that this investing style will just become it. It'll become investing. Instead of it being labeled as this investing or that investing, whether it's socially responsible investing or environmentally responsible investing, it'll just be investing from now on. And ultimately, each company who is a part of one of these funds that claims to be, socially or environmentally conscious will have access to, and I think down to the granular level, access to information about who they are, what they do, where they source their materials from, how many people, like you said, how many people work at the factory and what they're paid, etc. And so when you go to pick out a pair of shoes, you're going to understand the impact that you'll have by choosing one brand over another.
That's right. And, so often a lot of these issues get politicized. And the reality is that everyone wants to do good while doing well. Who doesn't want to make money while doing good for the world? But if you remove the morals for a second, you're unlocking trillions of dollars in the U.S. economy just by investing in overlooked founders. I mean, forget your moral compass for a second. It's an economic opportunity. It's okay it's good to make money. And so the point here is society will demand that we are transparent. We're already starting to see that. And it'll be companies that drive that forward, and it'll be capitalism that drives that forward. And so we're building that machine.
Agreed. So I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago about startups. It was a world I came from in regards to fundraising for startups. I found so many family offices and organizations that were managing capital who did not invest in startups. They believed that they invested in what they called early stage companies. However, those early stage companies were at, 3 to 5 million EBITDA before they would even consider talking to them. And I hate to tell you this, but 3 to 5 million EBITDA, there's no such thing as a startup that does that. And if you get a PPM or, an offering document that states that they're going to make that in their first year, throw it in the garbage. There's no way. That's not the way things work. Think of any opportunity you can think of. Nobody did, that level of profitability in their first year, much less their first 3 years, most of them. Yes, there's been a few unicorns that have blown up very quickly. However, it's, few and far between. So, and if that's all you're shopping for, good luck. So I wrote this article, and it's basically states that if all of those that were managing more than $100 million, which is low, I mean, that's a small fund. Mm-hmm. If they would all just invest even 1% of their AUM in startups or in early stage companies, we could really flip the script on development and research and forward momentum with technology in the marketplace, because there are so few organizations for a startup to go to look for funds. And the ones that are available are overrun with applications for funding. So I'm wondering what your thoughts on that are, and what your thoughts on how your company's trying to solve that problem.
Well, it's our secret sauce, and it's not so secret. Here, I'm sharing the secret with you. But, the reason we established ourselves the way we did is Global Good Fund, as a nonprofit sister organization, is an accelerator. Our job is to find, as a nonprofit, is to find social entrepreneurs that already exist, who are poised for an inflection point, who are ready to be accelerated, who never had a platform or a network or people throwing money at them, and coaching and capital to take it to the next level.
Basically a great idea with a great team around it.
Exactly. And then the impact fund, as the sister for-profit company, comes in and says, you've had leadership support. You've taken your company to the point where now it needs to be capitalized. And so that access to deal flow is the Global Impacts Fund's differentiator. I mean, we get access to companies at the seed stage very early, before other impact funds or other VC funds see them. We've been focusing on leadership development with these companies for a year, and prior to that, 7 months of doing due diligence. So we have a lot of intel and information, and we know who we have a trusting relationship with these entrepreneurs. So it helps us avoid pitfalls and mistakes around management teams and leadership. But if you're going to focus early, you're betting on the leadership. You're betting that they're going to be able to pivot, that they're going to respond to the market. And so, our differentiator here for Global Impact Fund is our nonprofit partner, the Global Good Fund. And so often, people poo-poo nonprofits, but here you have a really smart way that, I credit the Global Good Fund board setting up a nonprofit organization that exists to fulfill a mission of leadership development for social entrepreneurs. And then a for-profit that comes in and capitalizes on that and says, in order for you to scale, you need access to capital. And so that's how the two entities work together and gets access to really early looks at phenomenal deal flow.
Yeah, I'll give you my my fundraiser stamp of approval in that the majority of deals that I came across my desk that I wasn't able to fund had to do with the fact that the entrepreneurs in question would not take advice. And I believe that your not-for-profit helps to weed those people out. Absolutely. If they won't take advice, if they won't take direction, then they're not going to do well. They're not going to be ready to be capitalized. Ultimately, hopefully those entrepreneurs will have learned something from your program. However, some will never be ready for, the show, unfortunately. And, the sad part of being a fundraiser back in the day, not that it means anything here or there for this conversation, but the sad part is sometimes you have to take their money anyway, to try to, show them the right way. They won't always listen. The ones that do usually get funded. So,
Harold, to your point, the humility focus, I think when we're doing diligence on entrepreneurs, we provide critical feedback during the interview process. And you can, there are some people who don't receive that particularly well.
You just don't understand my idea.
Right. And there are some people who say, thank you, I didn't think about that, or I did, and here's what we did about it. And those are people we want to continue the conversation with.
Yes. And I think that's wonderful. So to wrap things up, the last question I have for you is the whole market now. Let's talk about the whole ES&G movement. So everything from your BlackRock capitals who are managing over $1 trillion, and they've got, 500 or 600, I don't remember what the last number was, but it's over 500 billion invested in their ES&G group now, and down to the smaller folks and the family offices that are just waking up to the idea that this is a potentially profitable option, as well as you could do good in the world. So where do you see us headed, and where do you see us long-term? How do you see us getting there?
So these big institutional players are critically important because they manage so many assets. They have so much assets under management. They're critical to moving markets. So we try to have conversations with them. And what they value about small players like us is we're nimble. We know what's going on at a grassroots level, and we are immediately able to respond to the market. So where we focus our energy and our financial capacity is where the market is headed. And so they have an incentive to hear us out, to listen, to get exposure. And we're excited to partner. I mean, these institutions manage the bulk of the market. And I think they're smart to at least start conversations. And I think we have a long way to go for really driving strong social impact.
My issue with the institutions is that they're still carrying companies that have absolutely no place in an ES&G fund, in their ES&G fund, because they kick off great dividends and they need their fund to be profitable. So
and it's hard to find impactful companies that can tolerate an investment at the level, a $50 million.
Oh, certainly. Oh, yes. No, I agree with you 100%.
Companies,
the opportunities need to increase in order to really gain momentum with the larger funds. You're absolutely right with that.
We need to take bets on unconventional founders in unconventional markets doing unconventional work. And once that starts happening, once we start putting capital behind.
Well, I think it has started happening. You've got a fund right now that's raising money doing exactly that.
Yes.
So it absolutely has started. We need more of yous, though.
Right.
We need more of the Carrie Riches of the world to come forward.
And we're really grateful. There's some really phenomenal organizations out there. I just highlight one called Transact Global, which has brought together first-time women founders who are venture capitalists who actually put up other companies. When we lead a company's round, we can come in, we can bring in a network of other VCs like us who want to invest in social impact, do good. And it's been a way to help capitalize companies that are otherwise overlooked by traditional markets.
Well, that's all the time we had for today. I wanted to thank you again. I am personally so very honored that you decided to join us today on the Social Impact Revolution podcast. Your work is second to none and absolutely fabulous. I'm so grateful that there are people like you in the world that are still trying, despite the naysayers, despite the fact that, not everyone is going to invest, but you're still out there and you're still pounding on doors and making phone calls and sending emails. Please don't ever stop. You're doing such fabulous work. And, when I get to the level where I'm going to look to throw a couple $100,000, you can bet you'll be getting a call from me too.
Awesome. Thank you. And, we're just getting started. And I want to thank you so much, Harold, for giving us this platform to share our story.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, great. So long for now. Thanks everyone for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.